On January 11th, 1,500 vessels popped up in the East China Sea. Not scattered, not chasing tuna, a tight 300-mile line. Then to the north, another formation. 1,400 more boats. This wasn't a line. It was a denial zone, a geometric shape spanning 200 miles, massive enough that commercial tankers and container ships were actively rerouting around it. The official line? It's fishing season. But looking at the spacing and the discipline, that isn't fishing. That is screening. China isn't protecting its nuclear submarines with better stealth. It is using a civilian shield, a wall of noise, metal, and humanity, designed to blind the most dangerous hunters in the ocean. Because if a submarine was truly invisible, it wouldn't need 1,500 fishing boats to hide it. This isn't chaotic. It's a system, and it works. Passive sonar is eavesdropping. You're listening for a whisper in a quiet room. Now drop 1,000 diesel engines, prop blades, and hull vibrations on top of the target. You're not just making noise. You're raising the ocean's noise floor. And that turns one clean contact into a frequency nightmare. China's maritime militia is integrated. Massed boats act like pickets. If a U.S. hunter surfaces, raises a mast, or a P-8 flies too low, 1,500 pairs of eyes, plus cheap commercial radar, feed a picture back to the mainland. Welcome to budget ISR. Not pretty, just annoying enough to matter. They're the outer skin of the sensor network. But the nastiest layer is ambiguity, the gray zone weapon. If a U.S. commander detects a contact in that mess, can they engage? No. Can they aggressively maneuver without turning the situation into a political crisis? Also, no. Every civilian contact poisons your freedom of action. China knows it can't fix quiet overnight, so it solved the problem the other way. Make the ocean loud on purpose. In a Taiwan scenario, submarines are the day one asset. Before the first marine lands, before the carriers move into range, the submarine contest is already decided. American SSNs, nuclear attack subs, have one job: strike the invasion fleet, scout the landing zones, and deny the sea lanes. And do it without ever broadcasting where they are. Because the logic of blockade breaks down if there's a force in the room you can't see. Submarines force the Chinese Navy to play defense. They force every high-value ship to assume it's already being watched, tracked, targeted. So Beijing's question becomes brutal. Can U.S. stealth survive if China turns the battle space into civilian noise? This fishing wall isn't a theater. It's a counter-hunt system designed to neutralize America's biggest advantage. Now let's take a look at what they are trying to hide. Because China isn't doing this to guard random trawlers. China sells the world a story called Second Strike Insurance. The People's Liberation Army Navy has expanded its submarine force to include nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines. The core platform is the Type 094 Jin class. They have at least 6 of these operational, and the next generation, the Type 096, is reported to be under construction. The loadout is serious: 12 JL-2 SLBMs per boat, often described in the range band of roughly 7,200 to 8,000 kilometers. Meaning China doesn't need a boomer off the coast of California. It can hold targets across the Pacific while staying comparatively close to Chinese waters. On paper, it's survivable deterrence. But here's the catch. Deterrence fails if the boat is trackable. That's the entire point of an SSBN. Land missiles can be destroyed. Aircraft can be shot down. But a submarine at sea is supposed to be a hole in the ocean, impossible to locate and destroy simultaneously. That is the insurance policy. If that SSBN can be tailed, if a Virginia-class hunter can follow it out of port and sit behind it for weeks, then it's not insurance. It's just a very expensive target. And that's why the fishing fleets matter. Because the truth is simple. China's subs are vulnerable to being tracked. And if they're trackable, the second strike becomes a story, not a guarantee. Noise is China's fingerprint. According to U.S. and Allied assessments, Chinese nuclear subs, even the newer ones, are significantly noisier than their US, UK, or Russian equivalents. We aren't talking about a loose screw. We are talking about reactor design, propulsion pumps, and hull resonance. These are fundamental sources. Even with pump jet propulsors, the Type 094 is estimated to generate around 120 decibels of noise. For context, open-source intelligence charts place that noise levels roughly equivalent to Soviet submarines from the late 1970s. Against modern sonar, loud is fatal. Now, compare that to the U.S. benchmark. Ohio-class SSBNs were built around quieting its speed, reported to be as quiet cruising around 20 knots as older U.S. boomers were at slow, stealthy speeds. That's the gap. Ohio tries to erase its own signature. Type 094 can't, so it tries to bury it under 1,500 civilian engines instead. Noise gets you noticed. Sensors decide who dies first. The U.S. Navy has spent 70 years building a distinct advantage. Data. Decades of sonar libraries, advanced signal processing, and integration with satellite and seabed arrays. On a modern hunter like a Virginia-class SSN, that advantage isn't just a sonar. It's fused sensor data plus libraries and processing that turn faint sound into a usable track faster. China's picture is thinner. Inferior sensors and less integration mean they detect threats later, and that lag is lethal underwater. Later detection means fewer options, fewer clean escapes, and less first-move advantage. The U.S. edge is the boring killer. Sonar data, processing, and integration. China struggles to protect its own boomers, and it has limited ability to threaten the hunters. Anti-submarine warfare is the hardest competency to build. You can't just buy it. It requires decades of training to build operator intuition. China is investing heavily. Helicopters, ship sonars, but they are playing catch-up against a force that has been doing this since the Cold War. And then geography steps on China's throat. To get real second-strike insurance into deep Pacific water, Chinese SSBNs must leave the fortress. They have to cross shallow, heavily trafficked shelf seas. Then they must pass through gates, the straits between Japanese islands. And Japan is a nightmare matchup. Highly capable ASW forces optimized for these waters. Quiet platforms, constant training, gatekeeping the exits. Once you leave the first island chain, you're not in a friendly pond anymore. You're entering mature ASW architecture, fixed arrays, mobile networks, patrol aircraft bands. So the safest move becomes a bastion strategy. Stay close to home, under surface cover. Now here's where the US advantage shows up, and it's not a Hollywood scene. It's maintenance math. There is a narrative that the US Navy is shrinking. But looking at the receipts, the undersea advantage is one thing: availability. The U.S. recently hit a milestone that matters. For the first time in roughly a decade, the number of U.S. attack submarines sitting idle, specifically waiting to enter maintenance, hit 0. That means fewer boats trapped in the repair line, more hunters ready now. And in the opening week of a crisis, ready now is everything. Math surge is simple. The U.S. has around 49 SSNs available. China has around 32 nuclear-powered submarines active. The U.S. response isn't subtle. It's forward deploy, backed by production pressure. The goal is more than 2 submarines per year, so there are always enough hunters forward. That matters even if China's Navy is bigger overall, because U.S. hunters force their surface fleet to move like it's already in the crosshairs, slowing everything China wants to do. And that leads to the weird part. The thing you'd expect to see, but don't. Because operating an SSBN isn't building a submarine and driving it around. It's reactor safety, missile handling, strategic comms that can't fail, and crews doing 60 days underwater with 0 margin for error. That level of operations leaves fingerprints, incidents. Western observers have pointed out something oddly clean. You don't see many public reports of Chinese nuclear subs suffering major problems on distant deployments. You don't see long, messy trails being tracked across the Indian Ocean or up near the Arctic. Now compare that to the U.S. Navy. 70 years of receipts, groundings, collisions, navigation errors, all documented. Why? Because the U.S. operates everywhere all the time in the worst conditions. When you live at the edge, you pay an edge tax. Incidents are the cost of doing business at the edge of performance. For China, the lack of messy, deep ocean data suggests one of two things. Either they have achieved flawless technical perfection, or they aren't going out there very often. It points to a force that spends a lot of time in the fortress, near home, where the margin for error is forgiving, because in the deep ocean the margin is 0. A single error loses the boat. We don't have to guess if they get caught. We have receipts. In January 2018, a Shang-class nuclear attack sub attempted a submerged transit near the Senkaku Islands. It entered the contiguous zone and was immediately detected by the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force. They didn't just detect it, they tracked it. They held the contact using narrowband sonar and passive tracking for 2 days. Finally, the submarine was forced to surface and raise a Chinese flag to identify itself. This isn't proof that tracking is perfect everywhere, but it is proof that near the first island chain, exactly where China must pass, detection and trailing can be routine. China doesn't just need to hide the submarine. It needs to hide the path out. This brings us back to China's workaround. Civilian mass. And honestly, it's clever. It's asymmetric. A wall of fishing boats that turns the sea into clutter and ambiguity. And clutter creates hesitation. But it's also embarrassing. Because when your stealth solution is 1,500 fishing boats, you're not hiding the submarine. You're hiding the fact it's an underwater tractor. Clutter can delay the track, but it can't erase the fundamentals. It doesn't blind seabed arrays. It doesn't stop signal processing. So yes, US stealth survives, because this is a fortress tactic. It matters most at choke points and bastions, the water China can control. But the reality is that they're using civilians to cover a weakness, because they still can't make a loud submarine quiet. Bye for now.